Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment in our webinar series. As you all know, my name is Jerry Naidu, and I am the IT tutor here at IT Online Learning. So I'd also like to extend a very special welcome to all of you who are new to our webinar series. So this is webinar number 5. So let's not delay any further. Let's jump into today's lesson, which is about storage devices and RAID arrays. So we're going to begin session 1 with storage devices. So in this lesson, we're going to look at long-term storage devices. So we'll cover 4 devices today, which is hard disk drives, solid-state drives, flash memory devices, and non-volatile memory express or NVMe. So let's start off with hard disk drives. So there are 4 key components of a hard drive, which you all need to be familiar with. So that's the platter for storing data, the spindle for spinning the platters, the read-write arm or actuator arm for reading and writing data, and the actuator for controlling the actions of the read-write arm. So let's go through some of these components in a bit more detail. So let's begin by talking about the spindle. So the spindle is located right here. So the spindle keeps the platters in position and rotates them as required. So the revolutions per minute rating determines how fast data can be written to and read from the hard drive. So a typical internal desktop drive runs at 7200 RPM, though faster and slower speeds are available. So let's also now look at the platters. So the platters are located over here. So these platters spin at a very high speed. So as they spin, a little cushion of air is created on the surface of the disk, which keeps the heads from riding right on top of the platter. So over here, we have our actuator head right over here. So it's the actuator head or read-write head, whichever you prefer to call it. So these heads read and write information to and from the platter surface. So data is stored on both sides of the platter. So there's a head on the bottom and the top of each disk. So the heads are connected to this armature right over here. So which has an electric motor that moves the heads in and out so that they can access every part of the disk. So if you were to look at the platter edge straight on, you would see that there's just a tiny little cushion of air between the surface of the platter and the surface of the head. So it's still close enough that the magnetism in the head can magnetize and demagnetize a certain area of the hard disk drive to create zeros and ones, but the heads don't actually touch the surface of the platter. So PC systems generally use hard disk drives for long-term storage because they can store huge amounts of information. So they're also a type of non-volatile memory. So they retain stored data even when powered off. So inexpensive hard disk drives spin at about 5,400 revolutions per minute or RPMs. So a good quality hard disk drive spins at about 7,200 RPMs. Well, you do get higher end drives as well, which spin at 10,000 and 15,000 RPMs. So the higher the revolutions per minute, the faster you can access your data. So hard drives do have a few disadvantages. So the biggest issue is that they're not very portable. So a hard drive has to be installed inside of a computer. So it can be time consuming to take it out and move it to another computer. So there are portable hard disk drives that do have a USB interface, sorry, which lets you unplug the drive from a USB port on one system and then plug it into a USB port on another system. And then the information from the drive is immediately available. So many of you may have seen this in many stores that sell electronics. So these hard disk drives are usually referred to as external hard drives. So they come in 2 different sizes. And that's 2.5 inch, which is what is found inside your laptops, and 3.5 inch drives, which is usually found inside desktop computers. So next, we're going to move on to solid state drives. So The solid-state drives are another type of long-term storage device, but they use flash memory instead of platters. So solid-state drives are designed, or rather designed to replace the standard hard disk drive. So SSDs are also found in many other devices, such as our smartphones, laptops, cameras, watches, fitness trackers. So they're smaller and lighter than a hard disk drive. And because they don't have any mechanical parts like hard drives do, they don't create as much heat or consume as much energy, and they're much more reliable, but also keeping in mind that they are much more expensive as well. So let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of an SSD and a hard drive as well. So the first thing we look at is speed. So probably the overall #1 advantage that an SSD has over a hard drive is speed. So there's no argument that the SSD, which contains no mechanical parts, is between 25 to 100 times faster than your traditional hard disk drive. So it means boot times are greatly reduced, file transfers are much quicker, and there's a lot more bandwidth as well. So the second thing we're going to look at is durability. So we mentioned that SSDs have, or rather mentioned that SSDs have no moving parts. So this means that dropping and rattling can result in physical or external damage, won't always mean data loss. So there are exceptions, but generally speaking, SSDs are more durable than your hard disk drive. So the hard disk drive, however, can suffer damage from trauma because it has moving parts. So damage to a hard drive can result in data loss. So the third and last thing we're going to look at is energy efficiency. So once again, there are no moving parts versus moving parts comparison can be used to argue the energy efficiency point. So the SSD does not require mechanical manipulation to become operational. So the hard disk drive uses more power in order to spin the magnetic platter used to read and write and store data. So as a result, the hard disk drive can overheat, whereas the SSD stays cool. It stays very cool under all functions rather. So let's move on to non-volatile memory express, or NVMe. So one more memory device you'll encounter in PCs is NVMe Express, or NVMe. So it's made for accessing non-volatile storage media through a PCI Express bus, or PCIe for short. You would have heard of PCIe in your course material. So it's designed for high performance, non-volatile storage media such as SSDs, and NVMe is well suited for highly demanding compute intensive settings. So for example, an NVMe can handle enterprise workloads while leaving a smaller infrastructure footprint, so due to its small form factor and consuming less power. So by comparison, there's a large performance difference between the NVMe and SATA. So for example, NVMe experiences less latency than your SATA protocols. So this increase in performance and reduced latency means that NVMe can be used with workload-intensive applications that need real-time processing while avoiding bottlenecks. So let's look at some of the benefits and drawbacks of the NVMe. So some of the benefits and the drawbacks of NVMe. So let's look at the benefits first, so advantages. So the NVMe drives can send commands twice as fast compared to your AHCI SATA drives. NVMe SSDs have latency of only a few microseconds, while the SSDs, or SATA SSD rather, have latency between 30 to 100 microseconds. NVMe-based SSDs work with all major operating systems, regardless of their form factors. So in front of you will also be the drawbacks or the disadvantages. So potential drawbacks include not all motherboards do have an M.2 slot for which the NVMe drive can slot into. And it's not very cost effective. It's also very, very expensive. So it's not very cost effective at storing large volumes of data. It's much more expensive compared to your hard disk drive. So lastly, we're going to move on to flash memory or your flash drive. So this, I'm sure this will all look very familiar too. So there are other types of long-term storage devices that are more portable. So these devices use flash memory. So this is your flash drive. So otherwise also known as a thumb drive. So flash devices are relatively fast and inexpensive. So they can read and write information as fast as a standard hard disk drive. So flash devices also provide a lot of storage space in a very small physical device. So you can buy flash storage as small as 4 gigabytes and up to as large as 2 terabytes. So if you open up this device, you would see rows of memory chips right here. So the memory chip inside of a flash device are different from memory chips used inside of your system RAM because they're programmable. So you can write information to the memory locations in the memory chips and then remove the power from these chips, and the memory will still remain intact. You can't do that with your standard dynamic RAM used on your computer's motherboard. So because of this, you can take a flash memory device, plug it into the appropriate port on a PC, and have it function like a standard hard disk drive. So you can store, read, format data just like a regular hard disk drive, but you're writing and rewriting data to a location on a memory chip instead of a platter. So this particular flash drive uses a USB interface. So all I would have to do is just unplug the flash drive from one USB port, plug it into another USB port on another system, and I've got access to all of my data. So flash memory is also used in digital cameras, smartphones, digital camcorders. So the SDHC memory cards often used in cameras are flash devices. So if you have a card reader installed on your PC or your laptop, you can remove the memory card from the digital camera, put it in the card reader on your machine, and use it just like a hard disk drive or thumb drive. And so that brings us to the end of session 1. So in this session, we talked about the various storage devices. So we also discussed the hard disk drive, solid state drive, the NVMe drives and flash drives, as well as some of the advantages and disadvantages of storage devices. So in typical fashion, for those of you who are new, I do like to have a quiz at the end of each session. To those of you who have attended my previous webinars, this will be very familiar to you. So in front of you, I have 3 questions. So there are 3 questions, and I will give you all 5 minutes in which to answer all 3 questions. So there is a Q, so for those who are new, there is a Q&A tab you'll find located at the top. So there's a Q&A box that's available. I would like you all to enter each answer for number 1, 2, 3, and you all have 5 minutes starting now. Okay, so we have 1 answer so far. Take your time, don't rush. Read through the questions and post your answers. So at the end of the 5 minutes, I will then reveal the correct answers. It's very encouraging to see some new students answering questions and being more interactive. It's very, very encouraging for me to see. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer the questions in the quiz. There's absolutely nothing to be shy about. For each and every one of you, I am always available in the event that you require any assistance with your studies. It's very, very, like I said, very, very encouraging to see you all answering questions. 2 minutes remaining. Remember, question 2 requires 2 answers. Okay, and that is it. So let's go over the answers for question number 1. So the question does read, so you are the IT technician at your place of employment. You often want to share information from your laptop quickly with your co-workers. So which of the following storage media would best allow you to quickly and inexpensively share your files with your colleague? So if you chose, let's have a look. So if you chose D, flash drive, you would be correct. So the flash drive, remember, flash drive uses flash memory to permanently store data on flash memory chips. So you can plug a flash drive into the appropriate ports, such as a USB port on the PC, and have it function like a standard hard drive. So in this scenario, you would simply just plug it in externally to your laptop, copy the files over, and then leave it to copy to the device. So let's look at number 2. So number 2 says you have been tasked to purchase several new Windows-based computers to replace broken or outdated computers. So you have heard that solid-state drives or SSDs can significantly increase the system's overall performance. So which of the following best describe the features of solid-state drives compared to hard disk drives? So you have to select 2 answers here. So if you selected A, which is an SSD uses flash technology to store data, you'd be correct. So if you had chosen option E as well, so that's an SSD opens files faster than a hard disk drive, you would be correct. So if you chosen A and E, you had answered question 2 correctly. So remember, a solid-state drive is a flash device with storage capacity that is similar to that of a small hard drive. So solid-state drives are used as replacements for hard disk drives, and they store operating systems, applications, data files. So remember, there are several advantages that we did. There are advantages that we did go over with regards to solid-state drives. So they are faster than hard disk drives, have no moving parts, lower power consumption than hard drives, which is good for laptops. They're less susceptible to physical damage. And they're smaller and lighter than your hard drives. So main disadvantage of solid-state drive is the cost, of course. So they are several times more expensive than comparable hard drives. However, the advantages make them a good choice in many situations, especially for portable devices. So looking at question number 3. So which of the following is a magnetic storage device? So I think this would have been a little bit more of one of the obvious answers. So if you chose A, hard disk drive, you would be correct. So the hard disk drive is a thick magnetic disk, or hard disk is a thick magnetic disk encased in a protective shell. So that is the quiz for the first session, which is storage devices. So let's jump into the second and final session for today, and that is RAID arrays. I do know that there have been a number of students asking for RAID arrays as well, and I felt this would have been quite necessary to cover this topic. So let's go over RAID arrays today. So RAID stands for Redundant Array of Independent Disks. So it's basically a way to connect 2 or more storage drives and 1 or more controller cards together as a single storage system. So this is done to improve system performance and create data redundancy. So let's take a closer look. At this. So in front of you would be a table of the RAID implementations. So there's different ways it can be implemented, and that's either through hardware or through software. So to implement RAID using hardware, your system must have a physical card known as a RAID controller. So many servers come with a RAID controller built into the system, but for those that don't, you'll have to purchase a card and install it. So RAID controller cards have their own processors dedicated to managing RAID arrays. So this provides greater flexibility for different types of RAID configurations, though it's initially more expensive. So with software, instead of using a RAID controller card, the system's CPU and operating system create and manage the array. So today's CPUs are powerful, so they're generally there's not a performance hit. So software RAID also works well, and numerous operating systems support it. So one of the major benefits of a software RAID is that it's easy to implement and a lot less expensive because you don't have the cost of purchasing a new RAID card. However, it can be a bit slower. So using either method works. But if cost isn't an issue, I always recommend going with hardware RAID over software. So let's move on to the different RAID levels. So we'll also begin by discussing RAID 0. So let's look at RAID 0. So we're going to begin by discussing the striping or RAID 0, like I've just said. So when you implement striping, the data is divided up and written across 2 or more disks simultaneously. So this gives you blazing fast read-write performance. So the drives don't have to be the same size, but the storage space added to the array by each disk it's really limited to the size of the smallest drive. So in this example, we have a RAID array that contains 2 drives with striping. So, or rather, with striping, when data needs to be written, it's split up with data being saved on one disk and different data being saved on the other disk. But the data is written to both drives at the same time. So even though you have 2 disk drives in the striped array, the operating system sees them as just one logical drive. So the 2 drives work together as one. So if you have 2 heads on 2 different disks, each reading and writing half the data, theoretically, you can read and write data twice as fast. So in practice, it's not quite twice the speed, but it is close. So striping across many disks can dramatically increase the speed of your disk input and output operations. So striping has some great benefits. So the total array capacity is the sum of the capacity of each disk. However, there is a bit of a problem with striping, and that is if just one of the disk drives fail, the entire array fails. So because the data becomes corrupt on all of the disks. So just remember that the 0 in RAID 0 literally means there's 0 redundancy and 0 fault tolerance. So each additional drive creates another failure point. So which basically increases the odds that someday the array will crash. So let's now look at, so the next concept is mirroring, or what we call RAID 1. So mirroring doesn't exactly speed things up, but instead it helps protect data by providing redundancy. So RAID 1 requires a minimum of 2 disks, so minimum of 2 disks and with RAID 1. The 2 disks become mirrored copies of each other, with both containing the exact same files and folders. And just like with the striped array, the operating system sees these 2 mirrored devices as one logical drive. So in a mirrored array, the data is mirrored or cloned to an identical set of disks, so that if one of the disks fails, the other one can be used. So it also improves read performance since different blocks of data can be accessed from all the disks simultaneously. So this can be explained in the diagram that you find in front of you. So a process can access block number 1 from drive 1 and block 2 from drive 2 at once, thereby increasing the read speed, just like with RAID 0. But unlike RAID 0, write performance is reduced since all the drives must be updated whenever new data is written. So another disadvantage is that space is wasted due to is wasted due to the duplicate data, thereby increasing the cost to storage ratio. So an important RAID term that you should also understand is parity. So mirroring works nicely, but you don't get the speed advantage that striping provides. So parity is simply a calculated value that's used to mathematically rebuild data in case of a failure. So you can store this on just one drive called a parity drive. So more commonly, though, the parity gets striped across the drives for speed, redundancy, and fault tolerance. So we call this configuration RAID 5. So, and it requires 3 or more drives to implement. So generally, it's best practice to have these drives all be the same size and speed to achieve the best performance. So when you set up distributed parity, you set up a striped array across multiple disks. So a portion of each disk is reserved for parity information. So this is what provides the redundancy and fault tolerance. So in the case of any single disk failure, the parity information stored on other drives can be used to reconstruct data for the failed drive. So the array will continue to work, but the performance will be slower until you replace the failed drive. So that's why it's a good strategy to have a spare drive ready and waiting in the array, because sooner or later the drive is going to fail. So keep in mind that if 2 drives fail, the RAID 5 array becomes completely corrupted and unrecoverable. So the last configuration we're going to look or we're going to discuss is RAID 10, also known as RAID 1+0. So it uses striping and mirroring and requires a minimum of 4 disks. So with RAID 10, the data is striped across the mirrored pairs, which provides redundancy and high performance. So RAID 10 is your best choice when you have applications that require fast read-write operations, like databases, emails, web servers, or any other system that's requiring high disk performance. So that's because RAID 10 doesn't have to manage parity. So in fact, RAID 10's read performance is actually twice as fast as RAID 5. And as long as 1 disk in each mirrored pair remains functional, data is always retrievable. But if 2 disks in the same mirrored pair fail, then all the data in the array will be lost. So another disadvantage is that only 50% of the total raw capacity of the drives is usable due to mirroring. So there are other RAID levels besides those that I've discussed in this session, but these are the more common ones that you need to be familiar with. And that's it for the session. So in this session, we discussed the different RAID implementations. We also discussed the striping, mirroring, and their respective RAID levels, which were RAID 0, RAID 1, 5, and 10. And well, yet again, it's time for another quiz. So again, you have 3 questions in front of you, which are all based on RAID, and everything that's in the quiz is based on what we discussed or what we covered today. So again, you have 5 minutes in which to answer these 3 questions, and your time starts now. I know RAID is a bit of a tricky section, so please take your time to answer the questions. And some of the questions may be a bit on the difficult side as well. So this is actually deliberate, particularly for the RAID section especially with the CompTIA A+. RAID is a very difficult, it is a rather tricky section for you to read through and to understand. But that's the very purpose of me trying to cover it in this webinar, just to give you a better understanding of the RAID implementations, RAID levels. Some of the questions that you find here in front of you as well. This is typical of what you can encounter in your CompTIA exams. They love to throw you into a scenario. They love to say that you're a customer or a customer has an issue. So this is good preparation. Okay, so that's it. So let's look at the answers. So question number one, let's look at the questions first. So question number 1, so which of the following drive configurations uses striping with parity for fault tolerance? So your options are RAID 10, 1, 0, and 5. So if you chose D, RAID 5, you would be correct. So RAID 5 uses this striping, but provides fault tolerance for single disk failure. So this striping breaks data into units and stores the units across a series of disks by reading and writing to all disks simultaneously. So let's look at question number 2. So question 2 is, one of your customer wants you to build a personal server that he can use in his home. One of his concerns is making sure that he has at least one data backup stored on the server in the event that a disk fails. So you've decided to back up his data using RAID. Since the server is for personal use only, the customer wants to keep costs down. Therefore, he would like to keep the number of drives to a minimum. Which of the following RAID systems would best meet the customer's specifications? So if you had chosen option B, RAID 1, you'd be correct. So RAID 1 protects memory from single disk failure and provides high read performance. So RAID 1 also only requires a minimum of 2 disks. RAID 5 would also protect data from single disk failure, but it requires a minimum of 3 disks. And RAID 10 requires a minimum of 4 disks. So let's look at the last question, question number 3. So Jessica is concerned about losing data due to a hard disk failure. So a computer will only support a maximum of 3 disks. So to protect her data, she has decided to use RAID. Which of the following RAID types would give Jessica the best mirrored protection? So if you had chosen B, RAID 1, you'd be correct. So RAID 1 is the only mirrored solution that can work on 3 or less drives. So bearing in mind, the one thing to keep pay very careful attention to is wording of the question. This is one thing that always catches students out in any and every CompTIA exam. Wording is very, very, very important to pay attention to. So always read through the question and ensure you understand why this is the particular answer. So like I said, RAID 1. RAID 1 is the only mirrored solution that can work on 3 or less drives. RAID 0 and RAID 5 protect data using striping. RAID 10 uses mirroring, but this requires a minimum of 4 disks. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's session. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending today, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next webinar. So also be sure to follow us on our socials, to keep up on our upcoming webinars. Please do also subscribe to our YouTube channel at ITonlinelearning. So all webinars will be uploaded to our channel. So please leave a like, drop us a comment, and again, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.